Wyoming's wilderness can do strange things to a person. There's a silence out here that crawls into your bones and makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. It's peaceful until it's not. I was 25 years old in the summer of 1996, working as a surveyor for a company based in Cheyenne. I loved my job because it let me explore some of the most remote areas of the state, places few people ever laid eyes on. But there are places I've learned that should remain unseen. I had been assigned to survey a patch of land in the Bridger-Teton National Forest, way out in the boonies. The company wanted to check the area for development potential. I had 3 days to cover the area, so I packed light, just my tent, some food, a compass, and my surveying gear. There wasn't even a proper trail, just a vague map that outlined the terrain. But I wasn't worried. I had done this dozens of times. On the second night, I made camp by a small creek, the perfect spot to set up after a long day of hiking and measuring. The sun was dipping behind the jagged mountain peaks, casting long shadows over the forest. It was cool, and the wind had picked up slightly, rustling the pines. After eating, I sat by the fire and stared into the dark, feeling the strange quiet settle in. That kind of quiet where your ears strain to hear something, anything, but there's nothing. Then I heard it. At first, it was just a distant rustle, like leaves being dragged along the forest floor. I figured it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But the sound grew louder, closer, and then it stopped abruptly, just beyond the reach of my firelight. I called out, "Hello." My voice sounded small in the vast darkness. No reply. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. It was probably just the wind, or some nocturnal creature passing through. I tossed a few more logs on the fire and got ready to turn in. But before I could even zip up my sleeping bag, I heard it again, this time closer. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the underbrush. I shot up and grabbed my flashlight. Sweeping the beam through the trees, I saw nothing but the thick, looming pines and the thin mist rising from the creek. The footsteps stopped when I stood. Silence again. My heart was pounding in my ears, but I forced myself to calm down. The wilderness had a way of playing tricks on you. Isolation does strange things. I sat back down, but I didn't sleep. I kept my fire high and my flashlight close. Eventually, the footsteps faded, and the forest seemed to return to normal. I must have dozed off for a couple of hours, because the next thing I knew, the sun was creeping up through the trees, the morning fog lingering on the ground. Shaking off the uneasy feeling from the night before, I packed up my gear and continued on my route. The day passed uneventfully, just the usual surveying, nothing out of the ordinary. But as the sun started to set again, that feeling returned. The air felt heavier, the shadows stretched longer, and I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. I told myself it was all in my head. By the time I made camp that evening, I was exhausted. I forced myself to eat and settled in for another night, hoping I'd get some rest this time. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of voices. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but the low murmurs continued. They were faint, distant, but unmistakably human. I slowly unzipped my tent and peered out into the darkness. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a dim orange glow. The forest around me was pitch black. The voices grew louder. I couldn't make out what they were saying. It sounded like chanting, low, rhythmic, and unsettling. My heart raced as I scanned the treeline with my flashlight. The voices stopped. Then, just beyond the light, I saw them, figures standing among the trees. There were 5 or 6 of them, all dressed in long, dark robes. Their faces were hidden in the shadows, but they were watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My mind raced. Who the hell were they? Why were they out here? I called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer. For a moment, we just stared at each other, me in the dim glow of my dying fire, them standing like statues in the trees. Then, without a sound, they turned and disappeared into the woods. My hands shook as I grabbed my rifle. I wasn't a superstitious guy, but everything about this felt wrong. I had heard stories about weird groups in remote areas, cult-like gatherings, strange rituals, but I never believed them. Wyoming was vast and wild, but this was something else. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, gripping my rifle and listening for any sign of movement. The chanting didn't return, but I knew they were out there. When dawn finally broke, I packed up as fast as I could. I didn't care about finishing the survey. I just wanted to get out of there. I checked my map, determined to take the shortest route back to the main road. It would be a full day's hike, but I didn't care. I wasn't spending another night in those woods. About midday, I came across something that stopped me cold. A clearing maybe 100 yards across, with a large stone altar in the center. The ground around it was scorched, and strange symbols were carved into the stone. Animal bones, no, they were too big for that. Human bones were scattered around the base. My stomach churned. The altar was stained dark, like something had been spilled across it, long dried. Blood. The air around the clearing was thick, heavy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, I heard the voices again, low, chanting, coming from deeper in the woods. I turned and ran. I sprinted through the trees, not caring where I was going, just wanting to get as far away from that place as possible. I stumbled and fell, hitting the ground hard. For a second, I couldn't breathe, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. Then I heard them, footsteps all around me. I scrambled to my feet, clutching my rifle, spinning in every direction. They were there, in the trees again, closer this time. I could see their faces now, pale and blank, their eyes dark and empty. They didn't speak, didn't move. They just watched. And then, from behind them, a figure stepped forward, taller than the others, draped in a robe so black it seemed to absorb the light around it. Its face was hidden, but I could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, like it was looking straight through me. The chanting stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the tall figure raised its hand, and the others began to move toward me, slowly, deliberately. I backed away, raising my rifle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking. They didn't stop. I fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing through the trees. For a split second, they paused. Then they kept coming. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran again, faster than I thought possible. My legs burned, but I didn't stop. Eventually, I broke through the tree-line and stumbled onto an old dirt road. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath, glancing over my shoulder. The forest behind me was still, silent. I didn't stop. I kept going until I reached a small town, disoriented, filthy, and terrified. I told the locals about the altar, the figures in the woods. They just gave me strange looks, shook their heads. I quit the surveying job a week later and moved back east, far from the Wyoming wilderness. I haven't set foot in the woods since.